What is the greatest secret you can know that will help you become the greatest writer you can be and get as many people as possible reading your book? Well, it's all about one thing: getting the reader asking as many questions as they can as soon as possible, right on that first page. How is this done? How is this possible? We're going to be answering those questions and more, and we're starting right now. As a writer, when you sit down to write your first novel, you don't want someone reading your book and feeling bored. You want them feeling. You want them feeling happiness, nervousness, laughter. But just as importantly, you want them asking questions. You want the reader asking the who, what, where, when, why, how. The more questions you can get your reader asking, the more willing they are to turn the page as fast as possible. They want those questions answered. As people, when we ask ourselves questions, we want answers. Have you ever watched a movie that was bad, but because there was a question of who, you had to watch it? Maybe you were watching one of those police TV shows about a murder investigation, and you find yourself watching the first 10 to 15 minutes, and now the TV show has asked the question: who has committed this murder? Well, you may not have wanted to sit down to watch that show, but you just found yourself watching it for the first 10 minutes, thinking that you will turn the TV off and go to bed in a few minutes. But you can't. Now you have to watch the entire program. Now you have to sit there for the entire hour because you have to find out who committed this crime. Because the TV show put questions in your mind, you couldn't walk away. The same thing with a novel. If you can put questions into your novel get the person who's reading to start asking questions, they're going to want to have answers. And as a writer, you want to hint to the reader that yes, those answers will be coming up. Dan Brown is known for saying this when giving advice on how to write a novel. He says, get your reader asking questions and let them know that yes, those questions will be answered, but you have to turn the page. And when you answer that question, you get them to ask, you put in another question. Now the reader has to turn the page to find out the answer to that next question, and you keep going along. You want to have a major question of how is this major problem going to be solved? You introduce it in the beginning, but the reader knows that they have to read to the very end. But you don't want to just have one question in a 500-page book. That's going to leave 499 pages of boredom, and the reader might give up, not truly wanting to know the answer, or worse, they can just flip to the last page, get the answer, and then close the book. What you want to do is have one big question, but you want to have multiple mini questions that are peppered in throughout the story. So at the beginning of a chapter, you have a question asked that the reader knows that the answer will come up at the end of the chapter, but they have to get to that end of the chapter. They have to turn the page to find out that answer. And just when you're finished answering that question, you fire off another one. So now the reader is compelled to read the next chapter because they want to have that question answered. And as long as you have one question following an answer, it's going to act as bait that's going to cause the reader to keep reading. They now have two questions. The first one is the big one that you introduced at the beginning that's going to be answered at the end. But now you have smaller questions that have been asked at the beginning of a chapter that is now going to be answered at the end of the chapter, followed by a brand new question over and over and over again until the reader gets to the end and their big question is answered then. The more questions you can get the reader asking, the more likely they are to keep turning the page. Because what does questions do? They create suspense. And suspense is what sells a novel. The more you can get people asking questions, it creates this feeling within them of I have to know. It's like when you hear a joke. If someone starts telling you a joke and 2/3 through they stop, well, you're not happy. You have to know how that joke ends. You have to find out the punchline. Even if the punchline isn't funny, at least you know the punchline. Because a joke is about a question, and the answer usually ends up being humorous. But a joke asks questions. It leaves the person listening feeling suspense. You're giving them just a little bit of information to keep them going, but you're not giving them answers until you do give them that answer. And as a writer, the more questions that you can get the reader asking in their mind about everything, you want them to ask who, what, where, when, why, and how. You don't want them just asking who, you want them asking a million questions. But the reader has to know that you as the author are going to answer those questions. Those questions answered are going to be there, but you have to turn the page to find out. Don't make the mistake and start asking questions right in the middle of your book. No, you want the questions asked as fast as possible. You want those questions asked on page 1, paragraph 1, first line. The faster you can get the reader asking questions, the more likely they are to keep reading. If you've ever seen someone in a bookstore pick up a book and they start reading, but they don't put it down, you can come back 20 minutes later and there they are still reading that book. Chances are it's because they were pulled in. They were hooked in by a question. Something was triggered in the reader's mind of the who, what, when, why, and how. And they just can't put down the book. And the next thing you know, you see them buying that book because there is a big question about that's going to be answered at the end. But because there are so many smaller questions asked, the reader couldn't help but want to buy that book. Chances are, if you're in a bookstore and you come across a book that you look at and you read a few lines and you close the book and you walk away, it's because you weren't triggered. There were no questions. The feeling of suspense was not put into your mind. You didn't ask anything. There was no feeling of who, what, when, why. And this doesn't just apply to thrillers. You can have this in comedies, romance, horror, science fiction. The more of a mystery you can put into someone's mind, even in romance or dramas, the more likely they are to want to turn the page, to have that question answered. Even if it's a drama about family members not getting along, you want to know why they're not getting along. Which family members don't like each other? What's going to happen next? Where does this take place? Why are they fighting? Why can they not find peace? In fact, a story about family can sell more than a science fiction or a thriller novel because when it's about family, it's something that everyone can relate to. So you can see yourself and your own family in those types of books. And the more you can get the reader asking the who, what, when, why, and how, the more likely they are to want to turn the page because you have fulfilled the greatest job as a writer, and that is creating suspense within the reader's mind. And what is suspense? It's all about wanting to know what's going to happen next. You don't want to spell everything out for the reader right away. You don't want to give the reader 2 + 2 and give them the 4 right away. You want to hint at that 2 + 2, creating the question in their mind of the reader. What is the answer? The reader likes to guess at answers, and they want to read on to see if their guesses are right. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But when you give someone 2 + 2 and give them the 4, you've not given them any motivation, any reason to want to keep on reading. But when you give someone 2 + 2 and you just wait and you leave it like that, the reader is going to want to turn the page to see if their guess is correct. Have you ever watched a movie where someone is sneaking around a house? Maybe there's a mysterious ghost or person, but there's no answer given. There's a hint that something isn't right. And because you can sense something isn't right, you want answers. You want to know who is sneaking around the house, who's outside. If the answer is given right away, then you can just close the book and walk away. But as a writer, you want to be able to give the reader 2 plus 2 and just hold and wait. And the longer you can delay the answer, the more the reader's going to want to turn the page more and more till they finally figure it out if their guess in their mind turned out to be right. If you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to check out my website, where I have a tremendous number of blogs that will help you become the greatest writer you can be. In fact, I'm going to leave a link to my website in the description down below, so you can go there and visit my website right now and start learning. If you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to check out my next video on how you can make every scene in your novel as powerful as it can be. That's going to make the reader want to keep on reading right up until the very end. In fact, I'm going to leave a link to that video right here, right now, and you can click on it and start watching it right now.